That I really kind of cringe at the introductions. That's not my favorite part, but I know it's kind of a necessary thing so that you know who I am and why I'm up here. And I'm thankful to be here today. Thank you for the invitation, and I'm thankful for each one of you for making time in your lives to be here this morning and to take a look at some truths from God's Word. I'm going to start with a couple of true stories. Well, first, let's just do this. True story. Michael is a respected businessman in the community. He owns his own business, works with employees and many clients. He's very well respected in the community. Michael came into our office, sat down in the waiting area with his wife, who was with him for this particular meeting. And as soon as he sat down, his body language began to speak. He kind of hunched down and his shoulders were rounded. And I thought, wow, I've not really ever seen him looking like that. Usually he's tall and strong, and I wondered what was wrong that day. Well, his wife, they had been in some kind of conversation when they walked in the door, and she continued the conversation as they sat down together for all of us to hear. And she was criticizing him. And sorry, guys, I'm going to get a hold of here in a second. My emotions are going to just show, so please forgive me and, weep with me and laugh with me. I hope we can do that together. And she was criticizing him and telling him his faults and berating him and bringing him down in a loud enough way for those of us who worked in the office to hear everything she was saying. And I felt so bad for Michael. Never seen him looking so beat down. True story. Kent called me up to talk about his business with me as an insurance agent, and he had some questions about his policy. So he started asking me some questions, and I was answering, and there'd be a pause before he responded, and I could hear in the background his wife. Well, ask her about this. Well, ask her about that. What about this? What do you think? Make sure she tells you blah, blah, blah. And so although Kent was talking to me on the phone, he was the one in the conversation who was pulling the strings. His wife. She was functioning as a puppeteer, puppet master, controlling her husband's actions in that conversation. True story. Robert's wife completely controlled everything about their life and marriage. She was the one that dominated the relationship. When Robert's wife passed away, Robert could not function. He couldn't do anything because his wife was no longer there telling him what to do. He ended up living with his daughter because he was so dysfunctional as a person at the end of his time being married to that woman and in that type of a relationship. These are true stories, and isn't it sad when we see something like that demonstrated for us in society among people that we know, showing a marriage relationship that is out of balance, when the marriage team is not in sync with the design that God placed. Come on in, ladies. So what we want to talk about today is a marriage team that works. Now, they've got my husband in there talking to the men, and I'm in here talking to you, so we're, it's kind of a team thing. So let's think about teams for a minute. And I want to say, I've asked a couple of you to read verses for me here in a few minutes. We're going to do this class together. This is not just me up here speaking to you. This is us participating. So you're going to answer and kind of, speak up. When I have a question, if you have a thought, speak up, please. Let's think about the word team for a minute. And I said marriage team. What other kinds of teams? When I say team, what kind of a thing do you think of? Sports. Probably our first off the bat thought. Sports team, right? Okay. What's another kind of team? I had to think a little bit, and we're using the word team loosely, a group of people who work together to make something happen. Teachers. Okay, so in the work environment, there's a lot of teams, people doing their jobs. What? Parents. Parenting, that's a great team, yes. Very connected to the one we're talking about today, which is the marriage team. Hospitals. Oh yeah, medical team, absolutely. Very good example. I hadn't thought of that one. And I'm going to stretch this a little bit, but what about a music team? Or maybe we call it a band or an orchestra. So there's a group of people who all have worth and value as human beings, and they're fulfilling different roles in that team. So in the medical team, not everyone's a doctor. Some are nurses, every bit as important. The support team that goes behind and makes that team work. So in a sports team, not everyone's the quarterback, but you gotta have the whole team and every member functioning in the way that they should function. In the music team, not everybody plays the flute. You gotta have the trombone and the drums. And that makes the team work successfully. When the members all value each other and understand the worth of one another, and they all fulfill their own place and their own role in that team, okay? And that gives us a beautiful picture of a team and what we're talking about when we say a marriage team. Now, let's picture some of those teams for a minute. Let's picture them not working as designed. So, if we have a sports team in which the running back wants to be the quarterback, what's going to happen? They're going to fight. Good one. What else? Chaos, somebody said. Yeah, it's unsuccessful. They're going to fail in what they're trying to do, right? Or a medical team, which could be critical if they're not functioning in their own role. Somebody could die. I mean, that'd be very serious. What about a musical team? Well, it's going to be a lot of disharmony if the members of that team are not doing their part, right? So we want to keep these team concepts in mind as we approach, and we want to apply these to our marriage team. I want to give you 2 disclaimers. I was given the title, Helping Him Lead. 2 disclaimers. Number 1, helping does not equal fixing him. So many times we ladies, and it's a talent we have, and I believe God-given, we know how to fix stuff, don't we? We know, we can see what needs to happen to make something better, and especially this helps in parenting skills. But when we start fixing our husbands, that is not good. That is not our responsibility, and that is not what we're talking about today when we talk about helping him lead. Secondly, helping does not mean that his ultimate choices are your responsibility. In other words, we might be the very best wife that we can be, and he may still choose not to follow God's design. He may still not fulfill his role as a husband, and that is his choice, and that is not your responsibility, okay? We're going to do what we can to make the team successful, but we don't take on the responsibility of the entire team on ourselves. Acts chapter 5 is a great example of the fact that God judges us as individuals, even when we're married, okay? Now, before we get into the bulk of our lesson, we want to start with this premise, the design. This team, this marriage team, has a design, and we know that the designer of the team is God. I've asked a couple of you to read, and whoever has Ephesians chapter 5, verses 23 through 25, would you read that nice and loud, like you're yelling at your kids? Ephesians 5, 23 through 25.
For the husband is the head of the wife, as Christ also is the head of the church, being himself the Savior of the body. But as the church is subject to Christ, so let the wives also be to their husbands in everything. Husbands, love your wives, even as Christ also loved the church and gave himself up for it.
Thank you so much. So we see the design of the team that God has placed out here for us. This is how this team looks. This is how it works. Let's look at 1 Corinthians chapter 11 and verse 3 as a follow-up to that. It's more of a little summary. Whoever has that, read it nice and loud.
But I would have you know that the head of every man is Christ, and the head of the woman is the man, and the head of Christ is God.
Okay, so there's a little nutshell summary of how this team looks, who has what role. And that's what we want to use as we go ahead and look into our lesson today. We're going to look at 4 areas that we can check ourselves and see whether we're relating to our teammate in a way that helps him lead. We're going to check ourselves in 4 areas to see, am I fulfilling my role in these 4 areas so that he can do the best job he can as a leader? 4 areas. Check myself. Okay. I'd like to give some credit here. We're going to use a little mashup of each of these 4 places. I'm going to pull in some, the 7 Desires of Every Heart. It's a book that was written by Mark and Deborah Lasser in 2008, The 7 Desires of Every Heart. And what this is it's a study that these individuals did of humans in general. What makes up humans, what they need, what we need to function successfully. And they've titled it 7 Desires of Every Heart. And the reason that I want to pull and give them credit and pull them in here is this. My husband, Mike Vestal, is different from your husband, Kevin Rhodes. So if I start to tell you what works in my marriage, it might not work in yours down to the specifics because the men are different, right? And we're different. But there are some general and universal concepts, and those are the ones we want to go to, okay? 4 areas. Area number 1. Do I see in our eyes, we're talking about our eyes. Area number 1, our eyes. Do I see that he belongs in the role God designed for him? Do I see with my eyes that he belongs in the role God designed for him? And this is very important. This is the crux of where we are, where we start. If we don't have this one in place, the other things are going to come much, much harder. A lot of the difficulties that I've observed in marriages and couples comes from a problem with either the wife seeing her husband in the role God placed him in, or the husband seeing the wife correctly in the role that she has. So it's important to see that he belongs in the role. You know, our eyes are so important. Jesus taught a lot about our eyes and what we see and how we see. I've asked someone to read Luke chapter 11 and verse 34. Would you bring that up for us here? Thank you. Read it nice and loud. School teacher voice.
Technology, give me a second.
Oh, no, you're good.
Your eye is the lamp of your body. When your eye is healthy, your whole body is full of light. But when it is bad, your body is full of darkness.
Okay, and there's a principle that Jesus put out there for us. We need to pay attention to how we're looking and perceiving, and are we seeing things the way God sees them, okay? The lamp of our body is our eye. In Matthew chapter 7, verses 3 and 4, he told us to clean up our vision. Sometimes we're looking at other people and trying to fix the beams in their eyes when we have, the motes in their eyes when we have what? A beam in our own eyes. So we need to be paying attention to how we see and how we perceive. This is something Jesus wants us to do. In Mark chapter 9 and verse 47, Jesus said that our eyes can cause us to stumble the way that we see. So it's very important to make sure that we see things the way God has placed them and designed them. I'll give you an example. The other day, I didn't have my glasses on. You see, I wear these. These are trifocals, which have taken a lot of getting used to, and most of the time, you'll see me walking around like this. Because I can't read without them, but I really hate to have them on. So the other day, I was at home, and I had them up here like this. And I saw this little piece of lint on the floor, and I said, company was coming, of course. I thought, oh man, I'm gonna bend down and pick up that lint. And I bent down and picked it up, and guess what? It was not a piece of lint, it was a spider. And that taught me that maybe I should put my glasses down for something that I wanna make sure what that is that I saw. I thought it was lint, it wasn't. That was a lesson for me. You know, Peter, oh, by the way, my favorite age group to teach is 2, 3, and 4-year-olds. And in 2, 3, and 4-year-olds class, you have to have visual aids, or else they're, looking at the ceiling and playing with their shoelaces. So we're going to have some visuals in here. And I think they really help me as an individual, even though I'm not 2, 3, and 4 anymore. We're going to have some visual aids to help illustrate our points today. Peter and Paul both spoke about our vision. Peter said that if we are not growing our character and our knowledge, and building on our faith, that it's like we're nearsighted. Well, let me just try this here. It's like we're nearsighted and we're tunnel visioned, okay? And we're so narrow, we can't see what's around us because we're not growing in the way that God designed and wanted us to do. Peter said that in 2 Peter chapter 1. Well, Paul talked about it too. In 2 Corinthians chapter 4 and verse 4, he said that the devil is going to try to blind the minds of the unbelieving. He doesn't want them to see God's light. He's going to try to keep them in the darkness. That has to do with our eyes. So sometimes I think that we don't mean to, but we're a little bit like this. Well, Lord, I don't quite want all that light that you're shining here for me today. I really don't want to see my husband in the role that you've told me he has. I have a better idea, God. We would never say that, would we? But sometimes our actions bear this out. We're like, oh, God, no, I just need to block that light out. I'm gonna not listen to what you have to say. So how we see our husband is very important, and we want to be lined up with the way that God wants us to see. Let's talk a little bit about the word belonging. Do I see that he belongs in the role that God designed for him? Raise your hand if you've ever been somewhere where you felt like you didn't belong. I have. Probably everybody has if you've lived long enough. And you just felt, and it feels uncomfortable. And you feel like maybe you feel alone in that or isolated in that place from the group. It's an uncomfortable feeling, isn't it? We don't want to create that kind of a feeling on the part of our husband when we're basically looking at him as if you don't belong in this role. God created us to belong. He created a community for us, his body of people called the church. In the church, the roles are different. The people, the worth of everyone is the same though, right? 1 Corinthians 12 and verse 12 talks about the different roles and then following that whole section. We have different jobs and roles in the church, but we all belong just as parts of the body. It's a very good illustration. God wants us to belong. Well, guess what? God wants us to belong in our marriage as well. He wants us to have that feeling of belonging. In Genesis chapter 2, when he created marriage, he created a team here. And similarly to a church, different roles, both valuable, and the sense of belonging is essential. An enemy of belonging is the word but, B-U-T. Well, I would love to see my husband in the role of leader, but, and then we put in our little objection, that little thing we see that we don't like. Or, I would honor my husband as a leader in the family, but and then we talk about how we think we're not compatible with that concept. I don't think God put a but in here. We need to honor God's design. I do want to say one thing as an exception to this concept. Yes, God designed husbands as leaders. God designed elders as leaders of the church. God designed presidents and rulers as leaders of countries and groups of people. Does God ever say it's okay to follow any of these human leaders in a sinful direction? If the government decides something sinful for us and puts a mandate out there, do we follow that? No, we don't. We can see it there, right? What if the elders decide something sinful? What if they decide to get outside of God's plan and do something that's not there? Do we follow them and just blindly follow them into that? No, we don't. What if our husband steps outside of God's will into sin? Do we blindly follow him? No, because Christ is the head of all, right? We looked at that verse. Christ, husband, wife. If the husband just gets out of that picture, we're still under Christ. And that is something important that I feel like may have caused some ladies to be confused. I'll say that. Some women that I know have felt confused on that. Well, my husband said, well, no, he's not God. So make sure that you're lined up under God, Christ, husband, wife. And that's where we stay. To close out this point about our eyes, do I see that he belongs in this role? I'd like to give you, at the end of each one of the points, I'd like to give you a prayer to pray. So the prayer to pray here is from Ephesians chapter 5, verse 33. Lord, help me to admire the man you gave me and to see him in his role, just as the church looks up to Christ. Wouldn't it be sad if the church was not looking up to Christ? If we looked down on him instead? You know, husbands and wives are a picture of Christ in the church. Isn't it great when we look up to our husbands and admire them? Yes. Now, Ephesians 5:33 is the verse. The prayer is a paraphrase in my own words. Lord, help me to admire the man you gave me and see him in his role, just as the church looks up to Christ. Number 2, our ears. 4 areas, ways of relating to my teammate in order to help him lead. Area number 2, my ears. Do I hear and understand him? Do you know that Jesus had a lot to say about our ears and how we hear? He did, maybe even more than our eyes. Jesus spoke of the importance of hearing, remembering, and understanding in Mark chapter 8, verses 18 through 21. It's important how we hear. It's important what we hear. You all know the verse, James 1:19, where we're told, be swift to hear, slow to speak, and slow to anger or wrath. Gives us the priority there of hearing. 2 of the 7 desires of every heart are being heard and understood. It can be a challenge in marriage because men and women use words differently, don't we? We can say the exact same words and mean something different. So it's hearing and understanding. We got to make sure that that is part of that communication. I love the quote, I know you think you understand what you thought I said, but I'm not sure you realize that what you heard is not what I meant. And sometimes with husbands and wives, it's just like we're almost speaking a different language. Even just driving here yesterday, my husband said he had asked me to drive the last little bit, and he was looking at the GPS. We had stopped in a parking lot. He said, okay, get back on 121. And I said, am I turning left or right? And he said, I already told you, get back on 121. He didn't say it ugly, he was being sweet. And I said, no, you said get back on. I don't know if that's left or right. Because we had gone off to the side at this point and I didn't know. I'm gonna have to ask you a question if I don't know what you mean, right? And sometimes it's that way. In all kindness and with no malice, we can just misunderstand each other so easily sometimes. I'd like to give us right here 4 tips for hearing and understanding. Number 1, give him your undivided attention. That is sometimes hard, especially if you have kids at home. It's hard to give undivided attention. Now that we have cell phones in our pocket and are in our hands all the time, that can make it hard too. My daughter-in-law and her husband, who is my son, had this little tradition when they first got married called Who Has the Floor? And they had a literal piece of flooring like this. I think theirs was vinyl, which was way less heavy. I get weight training in this one. And they decided to take turns. And if it was his turn to talk, he would have the floor. And she wasn't to say anything, and she would listen. And then it was her turn to talk, and she would have the floor. Sometimes we can just think of something simple to make the process a little smoother. That's something that they had heard and decided to use. I thought it was pretty cute. And it seemed to work for them. So give him your undivided attention. If you're busy talking or formulating your response, in other words, oh, I heard him say such and such, and I'm going to tell him this, this, and this, that's not undivided attention. So undivided attention. Number 2, repeat back. Repeat back. In other words, he says blah, 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 blah. And I say, so you're saying blah, 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 blah. And then he can either say yes or no. Repeat back. Number 3, validate. So this would start something like this. I understand that you feel blank. So you've heard the words and you made sure the words are right, and now you're getting the meaning behind the words. I understand that you feel angry. Or it sounds like you feel sad because you wanted blank. Those are important. If you can say, you seem to feel something because you wanted something. That'll help to clarify the communication. So validate, that's number 3. Number 4, mind my own nonverbal. We would never do anything nonverbal as women, would we? Mind my own nonverbal feedback. Even though I may not be saying words, I may be giving him some kind of look or my tone of voice. So nonverbal and tone of voice. I might say, I'm sorry, or I might say, well, I'm sorry. Well, does that have the same meaning? No. So nonverbals and tone of voice, those are 4 really good tips to help our hearing and understanding go a little more smoothly. And exception. I'm giving an exception to this one too. And the exception to this would be speaking lies. No corrupt speech is to proceed out of our mouths, Ephesians 4:29. So if you are receiving verbal abuse, just discard that. That is not something that you need to take on and believe every word of. Sometimes we are humans and sometimes communication is poor. Our prayer, Luke 8:18. We're going to close this point out with a prayer. Lord, help me take care how I listen. Number 3. Third area, ways to restore the relationship dynamic in marriage by watching these areas. Third area, my lips. Do I affirm and bless him? Do I affirm? There's 2 lips, so do I affirm and bless? Who has James chapter 3? We'd like to hear James 3, 9 through 11. Nice and loud, use your grandmother voice. No, that's too sweet.
With it we bless our God and Father, and with it we curse men who have been made in the likeness of God. Out of the same mouth proceed blessing and cursing. My brethren, these things ought not to be so. Does a spring send forth fresh water and bitter from the same opening?
That's pretty telling right there. It's a good reminder to check our speech. I tell you what, I can sing the greatest song of praise to my Lord as I'm driving to work in the morning, and then somebody pulls that in front of me, and what happens next? Blessing and cursing out of the same mouth. We need to watch that in our marriage communications as well. Proverbs has passages specific to women about how we communicate. Proverbs 25 and verse 4 and also 21 and verse 9 speak of a contentious woman. Even that word sounds ugly, doesn't it? 25 and verse 4, 21 and verse 9, contentious. Do you think a contentious woman is a team player? Nope, sounds like she's looking for a fight, doesn't it? Proverbs 19 and verse 13 tells us of a woman her speech is a continual dripping. Drip, drip, drip. What does that sound like? What would we? Annoying. Nagging. We just think we're reminding, right? We're just reminding him, but he perceives that as nagging. Drip, drip, drip. That's not affirming and blessing, is it? That's negative, negative, negative. Let me ask you this. Raise your hand if you are someone who likes to cook. You enjoy cooking, you like to make a great meal, you at least like to order pizza. Okay. When we cook, don't we usually put something on the food in the category of seasonings? Even if it's nothing but salt and pepper. We all probably have salt and pepper at home and we may use it, right? We pretty much know how to use that, seasonings. Do you season your speech as well as you season your food? Colossians 4 and verse 6 says our speech is to be as though it is to be seasoned with grace. That's the seasoning we're supposed to be using. Wonder if I'm doing a good job on that. Maybe I need to pull that grace out of the cabinet that where it's got pushed back in the back behind the suggestions and the criticism. And maybe grace is something I need to pull out and use on my speech a little bit. Well, how many of you like to decorate your homes? Do you have just bare walls at your house, or do you have something up on the wall? I do. I like my home to be a pleasant place to be, and I'll have something that I think is encouraging and warming on the walls of my house or on the tables as decor. Did you know that Proverbs 25 and verse 11 tells us that a word fitly spoken decorates the conversation? It's like apples of gold and frames of silver, Proverbs 25:11. Are you decorating your speech as well as you decorate your home? Something to think about. Now let's talk about those two words, affirming and blessing. First of all, affirming. Affirming is validation. It's not based on behavior. It has to do with his inherent worth and value. You matter. You are important. You're great. Do you know how much he wants to be your hero? He does. I just think you're awesome. And you don't have to say, it doesn't have to do with how he combs his hair or whether he puts his clothes in the hamper. It just means he's amazing. I'm affirming you. I value you. What are some opposites of affirmation? Give me an example.
Why do you always do that?
Yeah, okay. Why do you always do that? Or,
Did you really not do that yet?
haven't you done that yet? Okay, yeah, that's a good one. What about, we would never probably say this verbally, but sometimes we treat our husbands as if he doesn't matter. You don't matter. I got this. I do everything around here. You don't matter. Ooh. Yeah. It would be okay to ask him for help. That would be okay. Sure. Did you know that most of our men are out in the world, and the world and jobs in the world is a place where they feel a lot of tearing down sometimes. They're going to get criticism there. They're going to get correction. They're going to get somebody yelling at them. They're going to get... And when they come home, do they want all those same things from us? Can we not look and be a little more conscious of the way that we speak? Seasoning and decorating, right? So blessing, that's affirmation. Blessing has to do with complimenting someone or speaking well of them or praising them. And this might have to do with something that they've done. It could be. I like the way that you took the trash out when you noticed it was full. Of course, he has to do that, right? I noticed, this is a good one, I noticed that you put your clothes in the hamper. When I went to do the laundry, all your stuff was in the hamper right where I could find it. It was great, thank you. Thank you for opening the door for me when my hands were full. Blessing. What are some opposites? We've already kind of given some examples. What would be some opposites of blessing? Or what's a category? Criticizing.
You always or you never.
You always or you never. You always leave the toilet seat up. You never put the bag in the trash can after you've taken out the trash, which I do love, but then you leave the bag out and I go and throw potato peelings right into without the bag. What happened? Okay. Got to watch out, don't we? Team players acknowledge the worth and accomplishments of their team members. This is what we're talking about, affirmation and blessing. Here's our prayer, Psalm 19 and verse 4. Lord, may the words of my mouth be acceptable in your sight. Let me give you one last little visual on this one. Don't team players sometimes get a medal? Wouldn't it be great if the way that you talk to your husband was equivalent of putting a medal around his neck? How would he feel as part of that team then? Area number 4, ways to regain my balance and contribute to his balance as well. My hands. Do I choose him? And do I touch him? You know, God uses the analogy of hands in Romans 10:21 when he says, I held out my hands to you. Isn't that a picture? Our Father who loves us so, I held out my hands to you. And he's talking about in love. He wants us to come to him. That's our God, using hands as an analogy. Someone has Song of Solomon 5 and verse 5. Could you please read that for us, nice and loud?
I rose up to open to my beloved, and my hands dropped with myrrh, and my fingers with sweet-smelling myrrh upon the handles of the bowl.
Okay, so she's going up. Her hands were eager to open the door for him. I'm happy to see you. I want to open the door. Her hands. Let's talk about hands. Does anybody remember looking down at your hands at some point in your life and seeing the hands of your mom? I have. And I thought, wow, when did my hands start looking like my mom's? I remember doing that. You may be too young. You may take better care of your hands than me, but when that does happen to you, or if it does, can you remember your mom's good example and some of the things that she did with those hands that blessed your life and the life of her husband if she was a godly woman? Just like Naomi encouraged Ruth in her relationship with Boaz, maybe we can remember back and take some encouragement from our own mom, right? In an encouragement, in a way to bless our husband with our hands. But sometimes my hands are tired. I feel like Moses in Exodus 17 and verse 12. I'm like, I just need somebody to hold these hands up. I'm so tired. Well, let's make sure that we have the support that we can get from one another, maybe, and certainly from the Lord, to keep our hands ready for our husband as well. Maybe my hands are busy and hardworking. Ecclesiastes 9 and verse 10, I've been doing with all my might what my hands find to do. In all that doing, in all that service, am I prioritizing my husband? That needs to be part of our service, is how we treat our husbands. So, I use the words chosen and touched. Those are 2 of the 7 desires of every heart. Everybody wants to be chosen. Have you ever been chosen last for a team? I have. It's a horrible feeling. You're chosen last. Or maybe they really wish they didn't have to choose you at all, but you're like stuck there, and so they have to choose you. It's a terrible feeling. Being chosen is something that people desire, and our husband wants to know that we choose him. I choose you. I like this quote, we chose our love when we got married, and now we love our choice. I was recently reading a book for pleasure, and I read this illustration. I thought it kind of struck me on this point of being chosen. In the book, the character was picturing how he might appear on his loved one's calendar. And he said, well, I picture myself as a little yellow sticky note. I'm on there, but I'm not time sensitive. Is that how our husbands would feel if we said, where do you picture yourself on my calendar? I have all these urgent things and all these busy things and all these important things. Here's my husband right here. I'll get to you eventually, later. That's a bad feeling, isn't it? That's not the way we want to leave our husbands feeling, that we haven't chosen him. God allows us to choose. Joshua 24 and verse 15, choose you this day whom you will serve. But God wants to be chosen, doesn't he? Matthew 6 and verse 33, seek first the kingdom. That's God's priority. God's first is our husband's second. Or is he like number 14? It's important, isn't it? So that's choosing, chosen. And the other one on hands is touched. Do I touch him? Do you know that Jesus touched people all the time? And he touched them with compassion. We read in Matthew 10:24, Jesus touched blind eyes and made them well. We read in Matthew 8 and verse 3, Jesus touched a leper. Do you know who was touching lepers? No one. Jesus touched him. He didn't have to touch him to make him well, but he did. Mark 7:33, Jesus touched a mute man's tongue and made him well and healed him. Jesus went around touching people out of compassion. Isn't that a great example for us? Touch in marriage was designed by God. 1 Corinthians 7, 1 through 4 reminds us that touch is important to a marriage, and a special kind of touch that's only for marriage. Who has 1 Corinthians 7 and verse 5? Did I hand that out? Okay, thanks.
Defraud ye not one another, except it be by consent for a season, that you may give yourselves unto prayer, and may be together again, that Satan tempt you not because of your
Consonants?
incontinency.
Yes.
Speak.
Yes. So what that verse tells us is God designed touch in marriage. And if we're withholding that touch, the devil's going to creep in there. He sees that as an opportunity. He will take advantage of our marriage if we are neglecting this priority. Our husband really, really needs this from us. Our prayer for this point is Psalm 90 and verse 17. Establish the work of our hands, Lord. Yes, establish the work of our hands toward our own husbands. You know, ladies, I know you work. I know you work from sun up to when you fall in the bed at night. I know you're busy doing and serving and blessing others. This is just an appeal to make sure that your husband is one of the priorities in all of that work that you do. It's too easy to let that slip. So today we've looked at God's design and plan for a successful marriage team. We've looked at 4 areas for me to check and prioritize to make it easier for my husband to fulfill his role as a leader. So let's end with a couple of true stories. True story. She was very conscious of timing and of her choice of words when presenting her husband with a problem, even a life-threatening problem. Her name was Esther. True story. She chose her husband and made time for him and communicated her admiration to him verbally and non-verbally. She spoke well of him to others. Who was she? The Shulamite bride. True story. She worked beside him in the family business. She's mentioned 7 times in Scripture, always paired with her husband's name. A beautiful marriage team. Her name, Priscilla. Isn't it beautiful when a wife fulfills her role so capably, helping him lead by God's design? Thank you so much for your attention this morning. I don't know whether you noticed or not, but we used our eyes, our ears, our mouth, our hands. Does that sound like any song that you've ever sung before anywhere in any Bible class? My husband loves to say that everything I ever needed to know I learned in Pew Packers, which is our little 5 p.m. Sunday singing service. I really wanted to sing that with you ladies today, but I think since I didn't get a printout and we have no songbooks, maybe we will sing that. How much time? When is this class supposed to be over? In 5 more minutes? Okay.
Yeah, I think it's about.
Is it about time? Okay, then I'll tell you what, let's not sing it, but you go home with that song in your head, okay? Oh, be careful, little eyes, what you see. Thank you so much.